Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharatataila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanaye Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gita Amrita Duhe Namaha Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdham Gita Amritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us again for today's Gita class. Today we will be entering into the actual text of chapter 13, which I explained before as the first chapter of the third section of the Bhagavad Gita. So we're in a whole new section and a whole new topic, and you're going to find out what that is tonight. As a brief overview as to what we're going to be seeing over the next few weeks in this chapter, Arjuna opens the chapter with a question. He has a request to Lord Krishna for clarification on 6 topics. And the rest of the entire 13th chapter is Krishna's response to that question. So in some versions of the Gita, we should understand that actually Arjuna's question is omitted. It doesn't show up. Some people probably, based it on the Shankaracharya commentary, because Shankaracharya does not, his version of the Gita does not include Arjuna's question. It starts with Krishna's response. It doesn't really matter which one it is, because the teaching is what we want to hear. The only difficulty is that if you don't include that first question, then you have only 34 verses. Whereas the ashram version of the book has 35 verses. So we're going to include Arjuna's question as well. And it's helpful for us to understand, how the teachings began. So verses 2 to 7, like I said, the rest of the chapter is Krishna speaking, but from verse 2 to 7 is an explanation of something called kshetra, kshetrajna. You're going to learn what that means. And in this section, Krishna highlights 2 points. He is going to teach Arjuna and all of us how to separate these two. Kshetra means the field, and kshetrajna means the one who knows the field. Basically, it means the known and the knower. We have to distinguish between these two. And then the other topic he's going to talk about is identifying God with that knower, or kshetrajna. Or we can say identifying the kshetrajna with God, or Brahman. And then from verses 8 until 12, we have a third topic, which is what he is going to call jnanam. So jnanam normally would mean, at the very least, knowledge, and more frequently self-knowledge, God realization type of knowledge. But as we mentioned earlier in this course, in this context only, this chapter only, he talks about, uses that word jnanam to refer to the virtues and qualities that we need in order to, and the discipline that we need in order to acquire knowledge. So it is not actually that knowledge, it is an intermediary step to attain knowledge. And this is what I referred to before as having 20 qualities that we have to cultivate, or at least think about cultivating. That's going to be revealed between verses 8 and 12. And when we hear this long list, we should understand that, virtues and these qualities alone are not enough. We also have to deepen our spiritual understanding through what we call Gurupadesha. Gurupadesha. That means the teachings of the Guru. And traditionally, that process is broken down into 3 phases you may have heard of: Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. Listening to the Guru's words, it can be also a book or a scripture, and then contemplating on it and trying to eliminate all of your confusion, and then meditating on it deeply so you can assimilate it and make it your own. So in that long list that we're going to see later, Krishna includes virtues related to karma yoga, bhakti, and also Vedanta vichara, or reflection on the Vedantic teachings. So everything will come in there in the form of qualities or virtues or disciplines that we need to cultivate. The next section is verse 13 to 18, where he talks about Param Brahma, the Supreme Being. And he does it in the way it is typically discussed in Vedantic scriptures. So we'll get a very traditional presentation of that later. And he is going to use a method, a traditional method called Adhyaropa Apavada Nyaya, which means the reasoning used to refute superimposition. What is superimposition meaning? Okay, we're going to talk about that a little more today. We don't have to understand everything right now. And this is traditionally used to reveal that Param Brahma, which is beyond all words and experiences. It's like these koans, they can't tell you what is nothingness. So the Roshi will tell the disciple a koan, which is supposed to lead him to a state where he can actually experience it. This is sort of the same thing here. And then in the last 6 verses, 19 to 24, there are 2 more topics, which is Purusha and Prakriti, which are similar to the knower and the known, Kshatrajna and Kshetra. So with this, he would have answered all of Arjuna's questions, and then he actually, there's a concluding section, which is a summary of his teachings from verse 25 to 35. Now, let us enter the actual text by chanting the first verse. And this time I'm going to invite you all to try to chant those opening lines that come in every chapter of the Gita. It starts with Atha. Atha means basically now. So until just now, that was chapter 12 and a lead introduction to 13. Now we're actually going into the 13th chapter. So we formally say, Atha, we're going to start the 13th chapter, and we give the name of it, and then we actually read the first verse. So we will have everything in little bite-sized portions, so you can repeat after me. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Atha Trayodashodhyayaha Kshetrajna Vibhagayogaha. Arjuna Uvacha Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Kshetram Kshetrajnamevacha Etad Veditum Ichchami Jnanam Nyayam Cha Keshava. Very good. I should point out one other thing about this page. Two things. We have that on the screen. Good. I did notice a typo here. Since this is coming from Amrita Puri, I want to make sure that we correct that, at least here, virtually. Kshetra, kshetrajna. It's supposed to be J and then an N with a tilde on top, and then the A. So here, the N with the tilde on the top is coming before. So this becomes kshetranja instead of kshetrajna. They both may be Greek to you, but it makes a difference. So that one. And also, for some reason, this is a mystery to me, this one verse, not the rest of them, is lacking in the what we call diacritical marks. So just know that this one has been written out in Roman letters phonetically, but from the second verse on, you'll notice the proper diacritical marks that actually, in a scholarly way, show you how to pronounce the Sanskrit language in special letters. So don't know why this verse doesn't have them. And I also have been telling everybody, each class, that when I read the verse in English, I take a little bit of liberty in changing it to adapt to our, culture, and also grammatically a little bit of, American English. I think even British English, Australian English would probably prefer these versions that I'm going to share. Arjuna said, I wish to learn about nature. And I'm going to put / Prakriti there. Prakriti. Prakriti means nature, but the Sanskrit word has a broader meaning, so we're going to use that as well. And then in parenthesis we have matter, right? That's good. And the spirit. And then I'm going to put / Purusha. Purusha. That came up when we chanted, right? And then parenthesis, soul. The field and the knower of the field, knowledge and that which ought to be known. So these are our 6 topics. He wants to know about Prakriti, or nature. He wants to know about Purusha, or the spirit. He wants to know what the field is, which is Kshetra. And he wants to know about the knower of the field, which is Kshetrajna. And then he wants to know what is knowledge and what is it that ought to be known. So this is possibly written, later, just to introduce the subject matter. But whatever it is, now we know what Krishna is going to respond to. And it's actually very helpful for us to have this text, this verse, for another reason, because all these kind of terms need to be explained a little bit before we hear Krishna's response. Otherwise, unless you've studied these things, you'll be a little lost when he responds. And even though we said it's 6 topics, it's basically 3 pairs of ideas, or it's 3 pairs of terminology. So Prakriti and Purusha is one set. Then we have Kshetra and Kshetrajna, that's another set. Then we have Jnana and Nyaya, that's another set. So we have 3 pairs of words that need to be explained, and most of the time it will be this versus this. This is the difference. So it's like comparisons, 3 comparisons. And I'm going to explain a little bit about these terms so we get a little clarity before we jump into Krishna's response. These 3 terms are very similar to each other. Purusha, Kshetrajna. You can say Kshetrajnam, but I think that's the objective case. So just as a simple word, we can use Kshetrajna. It's a little easier to pronounce also. Nyaya. So these three are almost the same, and we will explain the difference. So Purusha, you must have heard that in Malayalam it just means male, but it has a philosophical name as well, which is it's the universal consciousness. And opposed to that is Prakriti or Shakti, which is the visible world. So they are two sides of the one reality. When you look at it dualistically, there's a substratum, but you cannot see it. It's invisible, it's unmanifest. That's the Shiva Tattva, that's the Shiva concept. And Shakti is this world that is always moving and changing, and it's the power. And then the other side of it, Purusha, is the substratum that doesn't move. So it's what doesn't move is consciousness. So the consciousness that is behind every living being, that is what we're referring to when we say Purusha. In this context, it's the Parama Chaitanya, the supreme consciousness. Kshetrajna, or the knower of the field, pretty soon we're going to reduce that to just the knower, to make it simple. That is also consciousness, but when viewed from the standpoint of an embodied being. So when we go about our business all day long, the only thing that remains constant, unless we took a nap in between, is that we are conscious and we're receiving sensory stimuli and we're responding to them, and we are awake, and we're perceiving things around us, and we're thinking and we're analyzing, feeling, all that. So for all this to happen, we need consciousness. And when you look at it from the standpoint of an individual, we call it the knower within, so to speak. The knower that of this field. And for me, the field starts with my body, right? And then only after that do I know other things. More about that will come up from the second verse onwards. Jnayam is the ultimate truth, or what is to be known. So there's only one thing we really need to know, and that is the ultimate truth. Once you've known that, you've known everything. This is what the scriptures say. But that truth is simply consciousness. That my nature, your nature, everybody's nature is pure consciousness. So it is also consciousness, but from the standpoint of what is there to know. There's only really one thing to know as our real nature, because there's only one real nature. So Jnayam is the ultimate truth to be known. Now, that's three terms. For the other side of the equation, we have two words that are applied here. Prakriti and Kshetram. Prakriti, like I said, is nature, but it refers to matter. They both refer to matter, but from different standpoints. When differentiated from consciousness, matter is inert, right? You know, when we have our bodies, but you can say that, you know, human being is a sentient or a conscious being. But that same body you pointed to, when it's dead, you don't say, this is a conscious being. They say, no, he's dead, right? So that same body, which is made up of matter, we don't call it a conscious being anymore because the consciousness is gone. So when we differentiate consciousness from the body or from the kshetra, the field, the initial field for us is the body, then it's inert, simply inert. So when we refer to the fundamental principle of matter, we use the word Prakriti, not kshetra, because the reason why we have a different word for it is because even during the period of dissolution or pralayam, we say that the Prakriti principle exists in a dormant form. And then when creation takes place and we see this whole universe, we call that kshetra. You can think of it this way. We have water, right? It's H2O. And when it is in the vapor form or the gaseous form, then we cannot see it. It's invisible. We could say it's unmanifest. For the relative standpoint, we can't see it. But in that same vapor, there is the structure for water, right? You don't have to tell it, this is what you have to do. You have to become water. No, it automatically, when the circumstances, the ideal circumstances arise, it becomes water naturally. So that shows that it is potential water. It has that, it's water in dormant form, you could say. So like that, the creation is there even during the dissolution in dormant form, and when the time comes, it becomes visible again, or becomes manifest again. So kshetra, that word kshetra, the field, refers to that which is inert in the form of the physical universe. So right now, we're not in that dissolution period, or we wouldn't all be sitting, watching these videos. So we have the creation right now, so that means this world is called kshetra. And Purusha is the seed, whereas Prakriti is the potential. So you have the seed is Purusha, Prakriti is the potential and unmanifest version of this whole world, and then Kshetra is the tangible matter and the manifest version of it. So we could also say that this word Prakriti is the same as Maya, because Maya exists in a dormant form even in between creations. We still use Maya to refer to the world as well. But in Malayalam and in Sanskrit, that word Prakriti is used for nature, for this world, but not in chapter 13, as we have to distinguish that a little bit. So the last word that he asked about in this first verse was jnana. Normally it refers to, a higher intellectual or spiritual knowledge, but here, like I said, it refers to values and virtues to be discussed in this chapter. It doesn't refer to self-knowledge here. So now let us hear what Krishna has to say in response to Arjuna's question. Shri Bhagavanuvacha Idam Shariram Kaunteya Kshetram Ityabhidhiyate Etadyo Veti Tam Prahuhu Kshetrajna Iti Tadvidaha. I'll read the meaning that I've just edited slightly. The Blessed Lord said, "This body, O son of Kunti, is called Kshetra, and one who knows it is called Kshetrajna, by those who know that." In other words, the truth of both Kshetra and Kshetrajna. So since that last part is not included in the text, I put it in parentheses, the truth of both Kshetra and Kshetrajna. Otherwise it becomes a little repetitive, redundant. But those who know that, what do they know? It means they know the truth of this topic. So in this verse, Krishna doesn't answer in the same response that Arjuna asks. He's going to change the order, possibly to make it easier for Arjuna. He's going to start from the body. So he says the body is called Kshetra. So it makes it easier for Arjuna. It's like, oh, okay. He's a prince, don't forget. And he is also a warrior, so very much familiar with his body and probably spent many, many years training his body. So it's a very familiar place to start for him. And, of course, for us too. We have to face it. We're more attached to the body than anything else. And he's going to talk about Prakriti and Purusha later. Not in this verse or the next verse. So this verse and the following one are extremely important verses for us to understand, because it is here where a Mahavakya comes. What is a Mahavakya? It means a statement, a great dictum that reveals the oneness of the individual with God. In a previous class, I think it was the Sanatana Dharma class, I was talking about these 4 Mahavakyas, one that comes up in each of the Upanishads, in each of the Vedas. The Guru eventually tells the disciple, Tattvamasi, you are that. And later the disciple says, Aham Brahmasmi, I understand now that I am Brahman. So these very short, crisp sayings that capsulize the mystery of the whole universe, the secret of the whole universe, these are called Mahavakya. So this is what this verse and the next verse are going to give us. So we have to dedicate proper time to them. I hope I can finish today, because it's very important for us to understand the ramifications of what Krishna is going to say. So we talk about the oneness of individual and God, but the problem is that, even though this is the most important teaching in Vedanta, we don't want to misunderstand it. Becoming one with God is impossible on the physical plane. So we have to understand that oneness on the plane of formlessness, from the standpoint of formlessness. Now, how do we do that? Fortunately, there is a technique that Sadgurus and Rishis and seers have used for thousands of years to help their disciples understand and reach that state. The first task is something called Atma Anatma Viveka, or Atmanatma Viveka. It means discerning the difference between the self and the non-self. So non-self means just what we call anatma, and we're going to define that in a little while, don't worry. But we want to differentiate between me, the atma, the true self, and all the other things, all the paraphernalia associated with my individuality. So everything I think is me is all anatma. Let's say I'm born in America, I'm this many years old, I'm a male, my name is this, and I like that, I just don't like this, I look like this, and I'm good at that, and I'm bad at this, and all these kind of things. I have this, my father's this name, my mother's and my siblings, and I live here, these are my possessions. All these concepts are simply erroneous paraphernalia mixed in our individuality, and we are going to call all of that anatma, what is unreal. So by doing so, we're going to separate the individual, the jiva, and atma, the true self. So now, what does anatma really refer to on the bigger scale of things? Anything that changes, anything that has a beginning and has an end, all of these things, basically everything that is made out of matter is an atma. So the whole universe is an atma, right? Because there's nothing in this universe that's not, a product of matter. Even you can say light, all these things. When the grand dissolution comes, it's not there. So it's destructible and therefore anatma. I'll share a little episode that took place for me that changed my view over time, but was a big shock initially. It was about 30 years ago to the same month. I think it was probably late February, early March of 91, when I first went to Amrita Puri and I got my mantra from Amma. And it was Devi Bhava. If you've been there, the Kali temple was half finished, and the Kali shrine, where they have the murti, the statue, the idol installed there. On both sides of that, there was no wall. It was just open because they hadn't finished the construction. So I got my mantra at the end of Devi Bhava, and something clicked, and I just, at least for some time, I was on fire. It doesn't last forever, but I stayed up the rest of the night. It ended early those days, like 3 a.m. or so. And I went up on the roof of the Kali temple, which was accessible to both genders at the time, and I just chanted that new mantra till sunrise. And something about the rising of the sun kind of illuminated my mind temporarily. I mean, it's not like a liberation type of thing, but there was an epiphany of sorts where I realized that I was 22 at the time, and I felt I wasted my whole life until this point. I chased after things. I was living a materialistic life, pursuing the temporary, and I wasted all of my life. Now I have to start all over again from scratch. And when I realized that, I became so depressed. It was such a depressing, gloomy thought, realization. It was the truth. Maybe Amma put it there in my mind. But it was so saddening because it was like it's going to be so difficult to be happy now. I can't, rely on any external objects for my happiness. But it didn't take me long being around Amma to realize that it is the best realization that anybody can have. Anatma is never going to give us any real happiness. It's better to learn that sooner than later. It's like if you have a toothache, you can have your tooth pulled early, or you can go through a lot of pain and wait for years and just suffer. I'd rather have it removed early on, right? So by the time it was painful. But then I realized that there's so much bliss around Amma. It's not a question of starting from scratch. It's a question of replacing wrong pursuit with the right pursuit. Took me a little while to figure that out, but once I did, all that depression and sadness went away. So this concept of the Atma versus the Anatma also came up in chapter 2. It came as a description of the Atma, but we can also turn it backwards and say, okay, so if it's the opposite of the Atma, then that means the Anatma. So we can use it both ways. So to clarify what Anatma is, the unreal, we could say it has no actual being, it is destructible, it is temporary, finite, it is manifest. Anything that can be perceived in this world that is manifest is actually Anatma, which is kind of sad. But again, it's better to know the truth sooner than later. Anything that has a beginning, it changes, it gets old, decays, and meets its end. That's all Anatma, including the body, of course. And that body, as a representation of Anatma, is called Kshetra, the field. That's what it means literally. And Shankaracharya gives it in his commentary. He gives it 3 different interpretations, all of which are helpful for us. One, and he bases it on the etymology of the word kshetra. He says that kshetra means that which decays, which constantly changes. And really, even the word shariram can be interpreted similarly, that which decays and dies away, changes. That's one interpretation. The second definition for the kshetra by Shankaracharya is that which saves the jiva, the individual, from samsara. How does the body save me from samsara? I thought it was getting me deeper into samsara, right? Well, not if you have a guru like Amma. If you follow what Amma says, you use the body as a tool for serving the guru, for serving the world, for doing sadhana, for acquiring inner purification. Practicing Vedanta Vichara, reading Amma's books, meditating on it. You need a body to do that, right? So, yes, we could say, in some sense, it is the medium for being saved. You can also use it the opposite way and take yourself deeper into Maya, but of course, none of us are interested in doing that. And the third meaning is, that Shankaracharya gives is, yes, it is like a field. Seeds can only sprout and produce some kind of fruit or crop if there's a field. The seed has the potential to grow and give fruit, but that potential cannot be realized without a field. You know, you just hold the seed in your hand, it's not going to sprout. So in the same way, the jiva, the individual, has a lot of karmic seeds from past lives. We all do, right? And they're both good and bad, pleasant and painful. But we cannot burn off that karma without the medium of a body. So we need that. That's why it said when you go to heaven, if you go to heaven, you know, you don't have a physical body. So there's no question of incurring more good karma there. You're just using up all of your good karma, and then when your bank balance is gone, you come back to earth and start all over again. That's why Amma says we're not interested in heaven. Then one who knows it is called kshetrajna by those who know that. So one who knows can be understood as the one who knows. It doesn't mean, see, one second, I'm going to read that more slowly. One who knows, the one who knows it, the one who knows it means the one who knows the kshetra. It doesn't mean like a knowledgeable person. The knowledgeable person part comes at the second half, by those who know that. But the one who knows it, we just said that kshetra is this entire universe. So who knows? Who's left to know that entire universe? That's what we're going to figure out. It means the one who illumines this body or illumines the entire universe. Even after death, we've heard stories, or near death. People say that their subtle body rises out of the physical body, and they can still see their body, which is temporarily dead, or until they come back into it. Haven't you heard stories like that? I have heard stories like that. So the subtle body comes out of the body, and they're looking at their body, and they're bewildered. Why am I not in that body? Because I identified with it for so long. But that means that you're illumining the body even when you don't have a body. So that's the consciousness, pure consciousness, that is seeing the body even without eyes, physical eyes. So those who know, now this is the second version of that, those who know refers to the wise people. Krishna is like Amma, so humble. He will never take the sort of fame of having made these statements. He says, oh, there's been many people before me. They all said it all. So it's a humble way of talking about it, about wisdom. And this word kshetra and kshetrajna comes up in the Lalita Sahasranama. You probably all know that. Kshetra Surupai Namaha means she is the essence of the kshetra. That means she is this universe. Then kshetrashe namaha. That means the one who illumines this universe. So again, that's consciousness. And then he says, the Lalita Sahasranama says, kshetra kshetrajna palinye namaha. It means the one who watches, maintains, protects, nourishes, and fosters both the field or matter and the one who knows and sees it. It's just, she's beyond everything. That's the concept. We have a number of verses like that in the Lalita Sahasranama in sequence where they say, she's this, and then the last one is like one that transcends both of those concepts. This is what is coming here. She's everything. So every living creature is a mixture of these two things, of kshetra and kshetrajna, the known and the knower. So that being the case, why does it matter? Why do we have to discern between the two? Why don't we just accept the fact that we're both? Well, the problem is that the two of them at present are inextricably intertwined. And that results in a lot of confusion for us. It causes us to mistakenly identify with the body and feel that the Atma, the self, our very own self, is a separate entity. When you read about the Atman in the scriptures, you don't feel like, oh yeah, that's me. Yep. Never born, never died. Yeah, I'm everywhere. I'm all pervasive. I'm omniscient. We don't identify with it. We look at it as like a separate entity. So in Vedantic terminology, this confusion is referred to as Anyonya Tadatmyam, which means a mutual mix-up, basically. You're mixing this for that and that for this. This is what we're doing, and we've done it from the moment we were born and many lifetimes before. So sorting out this mix-up, which is actually the whole purpose of spirituality from the standpoint of Vedanta, that is called Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Viveka. Or we could say Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Vibhaga, which is the title of this chapter. The Viveka means discerning. Am I the field? Am I the known or am I the knower? Which one? I have to first separate the two of them and say, what is the known and what is the knower? Which one fits me? Which one sounds more like who I really am? So we're going to get into that much more as we go along. Another commonly used name for this process is Atma, Anatma, Viveka. We mentioned that before. Atma being the knower and Anatma being the known. And in chapter 2, Krishna already talked about the Atma quite a bit. So he doesn't elaborate here. But the thing is, for Krishna and Arjuna, chapter 2 and chapter 13, it's so many hundreds of verses, but each one is about 10 seconds. So for them, the time, second chapter and 13th chapter are only like an hour and 20 minutes away from each other. But for us, it's been like 6.5 years. So maybe we need a little refresher, perhaps. I think so. So we'll do that, and then we'll go into verse 2. Sorry for taking a long time, but I don't want everyone to get lost and then be, not get anything out of the next verses. So, Atma, Anatma comparison is the same as saying the knower compared with the known. So we're going to have 7 comparisons to help us understand which is which. So for each comparison, we'll have the Anatma, the known, and then we'll compare that with the Atma, or the knower. So the Kshetram is the object. Obviously, if it's known or seen, that means that it's an object. It is seen. It is something that is known. Well, the knower is obviously the knower. It is the subject, not the object. It's the seer. It's the one that illuminates everything. Okay, that's one comparison. Second comparison is about sentience or insentience. Kshetram, or the known, is insentient, or what they say, jadam. It's inert in nature. But the one who knows or sees, the kshetrajna, is definitely not inert, right? It is sentient. It is the conscious principle. Without that conscious principle, what would we be? A big pile of mud, right? So the body is the insentient, inert part, and it is just a mere conglomeration of the 5 elements, right? The body is made up of the 5 elements, nothing else. And those are also inert in nature. You don't go out to a mine and like dig up a piece of nickel and then see, is this thing alive? No. These elements are all inert. And I just out of curiosity, I wanted to see what percentage of the body are all these elements taking up. I was surprised, even I was surprised to see that just 3 elements make up 93% of this body. That's oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. Oxygen is 65% of the body, means that we're mostly air, right? So when someone says you're full of hot air, it's actually true. You're 65% hot air, or warm air at least. Carbon and hydrogen. And then there's 3 more elements that bring it up to 99%. It's just a bunch of elements, So how can we say that it has any consciousness? It is inert, for sure. But it may come as a surprise to you that the mind also is inert. Yes. The only thing that's different from the body is that it uses the subtle 5 elements, the tanmatras, and those it uses the sattva portion. That's what is used. That is the portion that gives rise to the mind. So that's one. The second comparison, it's about conscious or inert. The third comparison is about change. The known is subject to change all the time. And there are 6 modifications that are referred to in the scriptures: existence, birth, growth, change, decay, death. So this is what all of us have to look forward to: growth, change, decay, and death. From the standpoint of Vedanta, they're not very romantic about life. They said, enjoy what you can, don't expect it to be great. Pretty soon, decay and death are going to come, and then just try to realize God before that. But what about the knower? The knower is unchanging, immutable. It is the changeless witness that illumines all the changes without undergoing a change. So if we can realize that kshetrajna, or the knower, before we leave this body, we don't have to worry about anything else. That's the third comparison. Fourth comparison is about whether it's temporary or everlasting. So naturally, something that is known is anityam, it is transient and temporary. Has a beginning and an end. And for us, those beginnings and endings are either good or bad, depending on whether we are like them or dislike them. When a baby comes, we say, oh, wonderful. But when somebody dies, we say, oh, no. It's understandable, but they're just 2 different types of changes. In order for a new living being to be born, means somebody has to die. Something has to die. Something has to transmutate. So they're changes only. But it's not the soul that is changing, truly. It is the body. All those, a new body is needed for a new way to purge our karmas. That's all it is. So the kshetrajna, the knower, is eternal, everlasting, doesn't have birth, death, or reincarnation, any of those things. The fifth comparison is about whether it is manifest, visible, or not. So obviously, if it is the known or the seen, the object, it is visible. It's manifest, what we call vyakta in Sanskrit. It has a form of some kind. So that means this whole universe falls in that category. It has some form. And even the black holes, they are trying to figure out its shape and size and location based on negative calculations, right? When you don't see such and so, that's where a black hole is. It's still, they're trying to determine a form of some sort. But the knower, the kshetrajna, is the chaitanyam, the consciousness principle, and it doesn't have a form, obviously. How could it have a form? Because if it's, well, we'll get to that later. I won't spoil no spoiler. And it's not perceptible, because it doesn't have any form, it's not perceptible by any of the organs, obviously. It is what we call avyakta, unmanifest. The interesting thing is that the body seems to have consciousness due to the reflection of that Atma, that consciousness, in the subtle body. We call that chitabhasa. So scientists can tell us what are the indications of life, but we still haven't figured out exactly what life is. The body looks like it's alive, but the science still hasn't figured out how to isolate that life source. The reason, perhaps we could say, is because it's that one common unmanifest principle shared by all beings. In fact, it's not shared, they're all that, nothing other than that. But I don't think modern science can accept that yet. So this is the fifth comparison, whether it is visible or invisible, manifest or unmanifest. The sixth comparison is about whether it can be divided. So divisibility, we could say. Obviously, anything that we can see, typically we can reduce it to smaller things. If you look at a car, it's made up of thousands of pieces, parts. We can take apart one. You could remove something, it'll still drive, but you remove another one, it doesn't drive. And you can take things and break them down into smaller sizes and parts. So all this divisibility is the nature of the world and anything that can be seen or known. But the knower, the seer, is indivisible, divisionless consciousness. You cannot divide consciousness, and you cannot be conscious of your consciousness either. There's only one consciousness. So that's why we say we cannot cut it into pieces. And in second chapter, Krishna talked about all those things. The last, seventh comparison is whether it is limited or unlimited or limitless. And obviously anything you can see, for you to be able to see it, it has to have a form that is limited in some way. To know it, we have to be able to wrap our intellect around that, to grasp it, so to speak. Even intellectually grasping, it has to have some kind of form, mentally. So that's what is meant by the kshetra, or the known, but the knower is limitless. That consciousness is limitless. So this is a very clear demarcation. It's like, okay, I know all that stuff. Why are you taking so much time to explain all that? But you would think that with such a clear demarcation, we wouldn't get the two of them mixed up. If it's so simple, if it's so axiomatic, why do we confuse everything? Right? Mutual mix-up. Why does that come? The scriptures say it comes because of the proximity of the body and the consciousness in our existence. We get confused. It's like the common examples used are like a flower, a colorful flower held next to a crystal. When you see that, it looks like the crystal has a color, like pink or red or something. Obviously, the crystal, like if it's a pure crystal, it has no color at all. Similarly, we attribute the body's qualities and limitations to the knower, the kshatrajna, and vice versa. How does that play out? Well, the inert body appears to be conscious, and the birthless, deathless Atma, self, seems to take birth and die. Though it may feel as though consciousness belongs to the body, in actuality the body becomes enlivened in the presence of consciousness. That consciousness being the knower, the kshatrajna. So this is what is meant by mutual confusion of the two, anyonya tadatmyam. Another example to help us understand these concepts is that of light and an object. So we have light in this room and we have a table here. We'll just use these two things. Can you see the light? What do you think? You can't actually see light, right? It's visible. It's invisible. Photons are invisible, at least to the human eye. But we can see, we can recognize light when there is an object for it to illuminate. So we have a table here. We have a picture of Amma, beautiful picture of beautiful Amma. Okay? So when the light illuminates these things, then we recognize that there is light there. And the table is visible, but the table doesn't have any light of its own. So in order for it to be seen, it depends on the light. When we see the table or the photo, what we're seeing is not just the photo or just the light. We're seeing photo plus light, right? If I turn off the lights, you know what I mean. The photo's still there, but you can't see it anymore. So this is exactly the same thing. We have this body, which is actually inert, plus consciousness. But because it's a combination of the two, it's very easy to think mistakenly that the light belongs to the table or the photo, and the consciousness belongs to the body. So even though the light has no limitations of its own, if the table is the only thing in the room, then it's definitely going to seem as though the light is limited to that form. So when you have a limited form, the light can only illuminate that. When you're out in space, everything is black, Unless there's an asteroid, then you can finally see something. The light of the sun is already there, but you only realize it when you have some, like the spaceship, or you look at Earth, something like that. The rest of it's all pitch black, right? So this is precisely what we mean. So to remove this confusion, we have to apply the same technique as before. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put a little slide on the screen, and we will go through these comparisons. Yes, okay. So we can do this with the table and the, like the picture, but let's just immediately apply this to ourselves to save time. Whatever we just said about the comparison between the known and the knower, we should understand that as very, very intimately understand it as a comparison between my body and the real me. So, on the left side, do we have Atma, or do we have, which one is on the left side? Atma, Anatma, okay. So I'm going to present it that way. I have my own list here, but I'll do it that way. So, the body is inert. I am the conscious principle. The body is known by me. I am the knower. We have to remind ourselves of all these things. The body is called Deha. The indweller of the body is called Dehi. That's, I am the Dehi, not the Deha. Anatma, that is the body. Atma is who I really am. The body is not permanent. It's very temporary. It changes every day, in fact, with cells, skin cells dying and brain cells dying, or whatever it is. And it's changing every day. So it is not the same. It is temporary and is going to go away, whereas the real me is nitya, is eternal. As the body, it is the subject. My body is the subject, whereas I am the principle of consciousness, and I can never be objectified. I am ever the subject. So the body is the object, and I am the principle of consciousness, the subject. The body is visible, vyakta. I, my true nature, is avyakta, or non-manifest, unmanifest. The body is constantly changing. I am the changeless witness, watching everything change. My mind change, my thoughts change, and my moods, everything. Even my intellect, my convictions change over time in the intellect. And most importantly, the body has limitations of all sorts, but I myself am limitless. The body, even the mind, the intellect, all these adjuncts, all these paraphernalia have their limitations, but not the real me, because the consciousness has no limitations. So I'm going to identify myself with everything on the right side of this list so that I don't get confused. We can remind ourselves over and over again, especially when something happens and we're sad normally. People will say to you, oh, I thought you were smart. Once Amma said that to me. I made a mistake. I make lots of mistakes, but this time she pointed out to me, she says, I thought you were smarter than that. That was all. It's like, obviously the conclusion is that you're not smart. So I had a reaction, definitely, internally. But then I said, wait a second. I remember Amma tells us, don't think you're the body, mind, or intellect. So that made it a little easier to accept. I'm not the intellect. I should be careful, but don't be sad when Amma says something like that. So all of these things have to do with the essence of the individual, and the next verse is going to be about the oneness of that individual with God. Let us read verse 3. kshetrajñam chapi mam vidhi sarvakshetreshu bharata kshetra kshetrajnayor jnanam yattha matam mama. And I will present it this way. Know me as the kshetrajna in all kshetras, Arjuna. The knowledge of kshetra and kshetrajna is considered by me to be wisdom, and we can put in parentheses, true knowledge. So this is a monumental verse for the Gita. And if you look at the Shankaracharya commentary, you will see that like each page he will have one or two verses. So he has the, in the book, for example, the one I have, it has it in Sanskrit and then pronouncing it. No, it doesn't have even the pronunciation. It just has Sanskrit, then English translation, and Shankaracharya's commentary. So for many verses, that's like one page, or sometimes you can put two verses on one page. You want to know how long he wrote commentary about this third verse? 15 pages about one verse. So that's like 30 times more than most of them. So you think it was important? I think so, yeah. So most of the remaining time tonight is going to be about that. So Krishna is talking here, assuming that bhava, or that feeling of, or that existence as God, Supreme Being. Myself means the all-pervading consciousness, which is the formless God. Like in chapter 12, we talked about God in the in the formless aspect. So that's what he's doing here. He's talking as that aspect of God, the formless absolute. And the main idea is that the consciousness we have in our body is actually all-pervading, even though it may feel as though it's limited to this physical body. Okay, so you hear that. Someone tells you that. Intellectually, we understand. But then when you put two and two together, you start to wonder. In the last verse, wait a second, he said that I'm not this body, but the consciousness. And now he's saying that consciousness is all-pervading. So does that mean that I myself am all-pervading? How can that be? Then, why don't I feel like that? That's the real question. And it's a good question, because a healthy person will experience consciousness in his or her body, but not everywhere. I feel pain so long as it is in my body or this body, but that's it. So how can I say that my consciousness is all-pervading? Well, that's a question that comes up, to which many thousands of years ago the sages already had a response, an answer, which is that consciousness needs a suitable medium in order for it to manifest itself and become vyakta, manifest. The only suitable medium for that is the subtle body, which obviously requires a physical body to manifest itself. You can't just say, I'll have just the subtle body, please. I don't want a body, it has too many problems. I only want the subtle body. Well, we do all have that experience after death, until we take another body. So you can pray for that, but then you're going to get it anyhow later. So you might as well practice while you have a body. Consciousness does pervade everywhere, like we said. It pervades all other places, but in the unmanifest, avyakta state. That's why we have this vyakta vyakta surupinye namaha verse in the Lalita Sahasranama. She is both manifest and unmanifest. She's the consciousness that pervades the world and even exists during the period of dissolution, pralayam. The example of light is again really helpful for these things. It's the only really helpful analogy for consciousness, light. So when we turn on the light switch, the entire room becomes full of light. How do we know that? Well, because we perceive the presence of light only where there are objects to reflect it. There's a reflective medium in the room, and the more reflective mediums there are, the brighter the room seems. If it's a big black box, it's not going to seem very bright, right? Because there's not much to reflect. So if there is a vacant space in the middle of the room, there's no reflective medium, so our eyes are just going to go all the way across to the opposite side of the room and we see the wall only, right? We're not going to see anything in the middle of the room because there's light there, but there's no object there. There's nothing to know or see there. But if you put something there, if a person stands there in the middle of the room, then you can see the light in the middle of the room. Light plus an inert object, right? I'm calling the body an inert object because we know that the consciousness in that person standing in the middle of the room is the same as our consciousness. So we can recognize the presence of the light that was already there but remained imperceptible until then, as soon as there is a physical a reflective medium. That's the point here. We need a reflective medium. So for light, that's an object. For the consciousness, it is a subtle body. It is the subtle body. So just like pure light cannot be perceived without a reflecting medium, consciousness can only be experienced when there is a sukshma sharira, or subtle body, to make it manifest. So when Krishna adds in the know me as the kshatrajna, as the knower of this whole world, that dismisses all ambiguity and it forces us to a logical conclusion. We can no longer pretend that the Atma or the consciousness is something other than us. If Krishna is the all-pervading consciousness, then he is the consciousness in me and you and all of us. And now, like it or not, I have to own up to that. I have to live up to that. I can no longer ignore the Mahavakya, aham brahmasmi. Typically we talk about it as a sort of an intellectual concept. But if Amma says, I am the all-pervading consciousness in you also, that should, if we really believe that, if we have the conviction, the faith, it should change our life completely. So to understand the consequences of this, we have to start viewing all living beings as reflectors of that one consciousness. Reflecting media are many, but the reflected consciousness is only one. Amma has told a story. She said that when she was a little girl, the kids would sometimes be tempted to look at the sun, or like a solar eclipse or something like that. And Damayanti Amma would always tell them, don't look at the sun, but I'll put a pot of water here, and you can look at the sun, the reflection in the water. So if there's lots of kids, there's going to be lots of pots of water, and they're looking at it, and they can see the reflection of the sun. And naturally, you know, the idea, the analogy becomes, it looks like there's so many suns reflecting in the water, but obviously, you know, we know, even a child knows that there's only one sun, and these are not separate suns in the pots. But with our body and with the consciousness, we do that. Even a small child should avoid that mistake, but we still do it as adults. And Amma practices this in her life, seeing everything as that consciousness. One time, many, many years ago, long before I met Amma, there was a story that took place. Once Venu, who is now Swami Pranavamritananda, he entered Amma's hut. See, these are in the days when they all lived in huts, just in a row. And Amma had, you know, a hut. Actually, for some time they shared the same hut with they had a curtain in between. This is probably a little bit after when Amma had her own hut, but nothing glorious, just the same conveniences that everybody else had. And he went into her hut and he bowed down before her. And then when he did that, Amma touched him with her hand and touched her forehead and folded her palms. So he immediately felt to ask a question. He said, Amma, when someone bows down, when someone prostrates to you, why do you touch their body and then salute them with folded hands like that, touch your forehead? And Amma's answer is so beautiful. She said, son, isn't everything one and the same truth? Amma bows down to the truth. I bow down to my own self. That would be a great thing if we can do. Bow down to everything as our own self. When we touch something, typically we touch the harmonium or the steering wheel or whatever. We want the blessings of that. We don't think of this as my own self. But Amma's looking at it as her own self. So even though it looks like there are many suns in the pots, even that plurality that we see in the pots with the reflection of the sun, that gets accidentally attributed to the seer. So in other words, the reflection, the infinite number of reflections of the knower in all these infinite subtle bodies makes us think that there are infinite number of knowers, infinite numbers of consciousness. So when we look at that consciousness, it seems like it is limited by this body. And when we make that mistaken assumption, we call that the Jivatma, because we are seeing it as the self of that individual. Looks, we have lots and lots of these Jivatmas, each one a reflection in the reflective medium of the subtle body, like the sun being reflected in the water, the surface of the water. So when you add in, all the bugs and insects and amoebas, it's infinite, literally infinite number of Jivatmas. It seems to be. But Krishna's wiping out that whole concept, that whole mistaken concept, by saying, I am the knower, the consciousness in all beings. So whatever body they have, whatever subtle body they have, whatever physical body they have, the illuminator or the knower of it, the consciousness is only one. And one commentator says here nicely, this ignorance that we suffer from comes from tamas. Tamas, it's like in a physical way, it's like lethargy. It's can be also like mental stagnation. Or in the intellect, it's ignorance or misunderstanding. So that tamas in the mind and in the intellect obscures our understanding, gives rise to misconception, doubt, and misunderstanding. But fortunately, it cannot exist in the light of discernment. Amma has said that also. It cannot exist in the light of discernment. So you invoke your discerning powers, the power of discernment, and that way you can dispel the ignorance, because ignorance can operate only in the presence of tamas. So we should be very vigilant about when tamas, we could call it like an obscuring power, prevents us from understanding things. We have to, when we're confused, we have to seek clarification, like Arjuna did. He asked Krishna. So the main point in this verse is that just because there are countless bodies, both physical and subtle, it doesn't mean that there have to be countless knowers, countless consciousness like that. There's only one consciousness, and let there be as many physical bodies as we want, doesn't matter. When we perceive this truth properly, and if then we understand the oneness of the Jivatma and the Paramatma, And we can even eliminate that word Jivatma. There's only the Paramatma. And that is shining, reflected in each being in this universe. That's why Amma cannot hurt anything, because she knows it's that same Chaitanya, that same consciousness in that form as a fly or an ant or whatever it may be. And that Paramatma, when it is realized, that person becomes a sage, a realized being, self-realized, God-realized, it's all the same thing. So for us, the Paramatman is Amma. If we were living in another age, it would have been Krishna or Rama or something, but this is the summary. The summary of this verse basically is the Kshetrajna, the knower of the field, we can just say knower, is the same as the Paramatma, the Supreme Being, and that is the same as the consciousness in the individual. My consciousness is the universal consciousness, and that is the knower of everything, the one who illuminates and knows everything. In Amma's song, Ananda Vidhi, you may have heard it, such a beautiful song that describes the state of realization. She says, from that moment onwards, the moment of realization, we know, she's just saying it for us. She was born with that knowledge, but for us, it's not like that. So she puts it in a way that we can understand. When we attain that moment, from that moment onwards, I could not see anything as different from my own self. Merging in that bliss of eternal union with the Supreme Being, I renounced the world with all its objects. So, it sounds beautiful. I could not see anything as different from my own. I merged in that bliss of eternal union with the Supreme Being. Everybody is together. I think you're with her all the way up to there. But some people might say, wait a second, why do I have to renounce the world and all of its objects? I don't want to do that. I have so many nice things in my life. Yes. You don't have to renounce them in that sense. Here, renounce just means recognizing the reality that all of this is just anatma. It's the kshetra. It's the known. It's an object. It's temporary. Right? It's not the eternal knower. It's not the subject. It's not the consciousness. It's not going to make my life any better because I'm already consciousness, pure consciousness. If I just realize who I really am, I don't need any of these things. They're not going to help me be happy, ultimately. So that's all about, see, in one half of one verse, he summarizes the secret of the whole universe. The second line is glorification of that knowledge. It is the highest form of knowledge anyone can imagine. It deserves to be praised or to be glorified. So the idea is that all other so-called knowledge amounts to nothing but ignorance, because it pertains only to Maya. You know, it's like you can say, write a 1,000-page book about a mirage. And yes, understanding mirages, you may need an explanation, but what is it actually? It's an illusion. It doesn't exist. So it's knowledge about that which doesn't really exist. And we may say that, okay, the mirage expert is like that, but not me. Well, yes, because everything we know, almost everything we know, is about Maya. Stock market, how to do something, how to fix a car, how to drive a car, how to talk, how to type, all these things. This is all Maya. So that knowledge is not really knowledge from the spiritual standpoint. Krishna says that there's only one knowledge, and that is what helps us become free from Maya. Today's scientific inquiry is indeed a very sincere quest into Prakriti, the universe, or just matter, and is brought science very close to the Purusha in many ways. They can measure all kinds of things about the consciousness and awareness. But until Amma has said that until that quest turns towards the divine, it will never be complete. Just for reference, just yesterday, I check these things sometimes. You know, there was a news item, a new theory was announced about the origin and ultimate fate of the universe. So we can all go home. We can just forget about Bhagavad Gita. They figured it out, right? Well, it's like version 5,000 billion, and one, because it keeps changing. Somehow we're missing the key point, which is that to know the origin of the universe, we have to know the universal intelligence, which is our own true nature. There's no question of understanding the origin of the universe until you understand the origin of this, me, the self. Knowledge about Maya is, helpful, it's practical, while living in Maya, but it doesn't get you out of Maya. That's the limitation. The only knowledge that enables us to become permanently free from samsara is this knowledge that he's giving us now, distinguishing between the kshetra and kshetrajna, the known and the knower. And to do that, it has two aspects. Understanding that I am different from the body. The self is different from the body. Includes the energy body, the emotional body, the intellectual, all this. That's not the real me. And then, on a positive way, we say, I am one or identical with the all-pervading Ishvara. I'm identical with pure consciousness, with Brahma Chaitanyam. That's what the Chin Mudra symbolizes. You may have, about Chin Mudra, where we go like this. So it symbolizes the de-identification from the Anatma and identification with the Paramatma. These three fingers symbolize the three bodies that I just mentioned, physical, subtle, and causal. And so this represents the Jivatma, and this thumb represents the Paramatman. So first we separate the Jivatma from the three bodies, and we unite it. It's not really uniting, it's becoming one or realizing oneness with the Paramatman. That's what this mudra stands for. And since this is the knowledge that liberates us from samsara, Krishna says, this alone is true knowledge. Who says so? I say so, he says. I consider it to be true knowledge. Now, from verses 4 to 7, Krishna is going to be talking more about the kshetra, that which is known. And we'll hear that more, but we'll just hear the introduction to those 5 verses. In verse 4, we'll read that out. And doesn't need a whole lot of explanation, but we'll touch on that and then move on to questions. So let us together read verse 4. Tat kshetram yaccha yadrikcha yadvikari yataschayat sachayo yat prabhavascha tatsamasena me shranu. This verse doesn't need any modification, I don't think. What the kshetra is, what its properties are, what its modifications are, what effects arise from what causes, and also who he is and what his powers are. All this hear from me in a nutshell, in brief. So far, Krishna had only said one thing about the kshetra. He just said the body is the kshetra. So he's going to give a more detailed explanation of what that kshetra, that the known or the field, basically Anatma, this whole universe. What is that? And this is the introductory verse to that section. He's going to give, he just listed 6 things he's going to tell. So let's find out what those are just to be clear. What is the kshetra? I'll use the word kshetra, the known. What is the nature, the fundamental nature of that kshetra? What are its effects, or what does it produce? What are its products? And which product came from which cause? He says he's also going to tell us what the knower is, the knower of the kshetra, the knower of the field, and what are the glories of that knower. So we have 4 points about the field, the kshetra, the known, and 2 points about the knower, kshetrajna. And ultimately, he really speaks almost entirely about the kshetra, the known. That's what's going to happen. And why not about kshetrajna, the knower? Well, probably because he's later going to talk about that to be known. That is known. Jneyam, jneyam. That's going to come later, and it's almost the same thing as kshetrajna. So that will come up later on its own in a different way. So we've covered 4 verses of this chapter. Now, excuse me, I'm going to try to respond to some questions that came up. So there was only one from last week left over, and then one new one from this week. In his book, Amrita Ashtakam, Swami Ramakrishnananda Puri talks about waves of desires subside momentarily once we fulfill our desire for something or an object. Due to temporary mental stillness, we get a brief glimpse of bliss of the self due to our ignorance. We attribute this happiness to external circumstances such as the object acquired. Similarly, we derive happiness from companionship or from worldly relationships. Why do we feel happiness due to these relationships, and what desires could these be fulfilling? That's a very good question. I can only share just one perspective on it. But it seems that relationships resolve a feeling of loneliness that's lying very deep within people, all of us. So a feeling of loneliness or lacking or feeling unloved, unworthy, it just depends on your past life karma. Some people come with a tremendous need to be loved. I've seen that many times. And these are the people who sometimes, they're always trying to get Amma's attention, yes, but also sometimes they will do things that you wouldn't want to do normally just to get attention from people, either in a positive way or in a negative way. So it's the past life karma. What did we bring with us into this life? So we seek to get that was what was missing last time. In the Freudian sense, they might talk about this lifetime. We talk about like millions of lifetimes, basically, because we don't know where that came from, that hunger or thirst came from. So we are trying to fill in that what is lacking in our mind, but not knowing that what's really lacking is spiritual knowledge. Like, if we understood what Krishna is talking about, if we could experience that, we wouldn't care. We'd say, I don't care, you don't have to love me, just I am love. I don't feel lonely. I am the whole universe. I mean, you don't have any more problems like that. There's no question of having a wounded heart or needing attention or any of these things. To the extent that we understand spiritual principles, the less we need to get from people through relationships. That's the reality. But while people are in relationships, maybe they're resolving these feelings that they felt were lacking. And of course, it's only a temporary solution. But sometimes what I have seen is that relationships can help a person resolve some of those latent tendencies that they just couldn't work out on their own. And some of the obstacles in the path may be, reduced through interacting with that person. You also probably have some karma with them, and you're getting rid of that karma and lightening up the burden in your mind. If nothing else, relationships will make you stronger, because ultimately you're going to fight and you're going to say mean things, you're going to beat each other up verbally, and then it's like you learn how to box and you get knocked down a bunch of times and you get back up, so you're stronger afterwards. So even if it's not like lovey-dovey, the fighting will make you stronger. Everybody needs strength. I'm talking about inner strength, not muscle strength, inner strength, in order to grow spiritually. So if you get some inner strength through a relationship, that itself is helpful. And the 4 stages of life are all about that, becoming independent. You start off as a brahmachari, studying for 20 years, basically from age 8 on. You go to a gurukula, 12 years. At age 20, they used to get married early, and then they would live a householder life for X, decades, maybe to age 50, 60 or so. And then they would retire from society and start to prepare themselves for complete renunciation. And they would be, sort of halfway in society, but mostly out of society for another few decades. And then the last 20, 30 years of their life was sannyasa, and they even separated from each other, even if they were married. That's to become independent and realize the truth within yourself. So that whole life route map is to help us become stronger. Just one last quick question, which is from last week. Person's asking, we finished chapter 12 and we're now on 13. I'm wondering whether I should even watch those previous Gita classes, because I might get confused. I would say it's up to you, person to person. It depends on how your mind works. Some people like to focus on one thing, and they need to focus on one idea at a time, in which case you can go to those other concepts later another time. Some people feel like they need to, assimilate or sort of synthesize understanding of different parts of the Gita, so they can watch the previous ones too. So whatever works for you, you try it, and if it doesn't work, you can drop the idea. Om Namah Shivaya. So we are concluding the class part of it. We will take some time for meditation afterwards, for those who would like to meditate. And I should also mention that next week we have Mahashivaratri on Thursday. It's going to be celebrated across the country as well as in India. We don't know what, if anything, will be accessible from here to see in India, but we know a huge celebration even just in the US alone. So that will be on a Thursday, our usual Bhagavad Gita class day, so we're definitely not having this class next week. And it's such a big celebration that we're just going to make that the de facto satsang for Saturday. So we won't have satsang on Saturday either. So just wanted to let you know ahead of time. And now we will close with Asatoma and Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Let us chant Loka Samasta 9 times, because the world needs so much peace, and so do we. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. 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 Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Those of you who are joining us, let us have a very brief meditation. Check your posture, close your eyes, and take a few long, deep breaths. With each long, deep inhalation and exhalation, feel your body and mind relaxing further and further. Now try to focus your awareness entirely on the breathing process. Feel the rhythmic flow of the breath as it peacefully comes in and goes out again. Remain as a witness to the breath. Try to simply watch it. Now, just as you are witnessing the breath, try to witness the entire body, as if you are looking at the body as a separate entity. Try to see it in that way, witnessing it, not identifying with it. While witnessing the body, we feel so peaceful. We can de-identify from all of our problems, just immersed in the witness state. Now let us share that peaceful feeling with all creatures, all beings everywhere by chanting one last closing prayer, Purnamada. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyade Purnasya Purnamayaya Purnameva Vashishyade. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. In the classes to come, we will try to use the meditations as a way to practice what is shown in the text. in the Gita that we studied that day. So we'll be doing similar meditations like this each week. Namaskar.